A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. I've got with me today Dottie Schindliner, who is VP of Thought Leadership at Diligent Corporation. How you doing today, Dottie?
I'm doing great, Nikki. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Hey, no problem. I'm super excited to get into what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about building a thought leadership discipline within an organization and why it's important to be intentional about that sort of thing. But before we dig into all of that, Dottie, I'd love for you to just give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the folks at Diligent have been up to these days.
Sure. So it's probably helpful if I just explain what Diligent is as well. So Diligent Corporation is primarily a software company that focuses on providing solutions to corporate leaders and board members of organizations around the globe. So as an enterprise, we work with about 650,000 senior leaders of companies and organizations in the corporate space and the nonprofit space, really all over the world. And so we spend a lot of our time thinking and talking, eating, sleeping, and breathing board governance. So we're a lot of us kind of governance geeks. We spend a lot of time writing about these issues, thinking about these issues, talking about these issues. And so that's actually sort of where I came from. I've been working in governance for about 20 years in a variety of different roles. The reason I came to Diligent was that prior to Diligent, I helped to get a company off the ground called Board Effect, which was acquired by Diligent at the end of 2016. And I had the great good fortune at that time to be asked if I'd like to come and join the Diligent team and sort of help with the development of a thought leadership enterprise for Diligent. And so that's what I'm doing now. So it's been really exciting to get into this role and very rewarding to be part of this exciting new venture at Diligent.
Yeah, it is exciting, and I can't wait to hear more about it because here's the thing, right? Everybody and their little cousin is talking about thought leadership, and they're doing it at the individual level, folks making use of LinkedIn, and you see certain folks within an organization trying to advance that initiative, or maybe even, at the C-suite level, folks throwing budget at it, but not being as intentional as saying, hey, we're going to have someone who owns this endeavor as a rule. So talk a little bit about, Dottie, about why you guys felt it was important to take that step.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're so right, Nick. It can happen at lots of different levels, but it's so much better when you think about it as a very intentional approach and a very intentional project. And the reason that's so much better, and I think the way that companies should think about going is that when you are in a particular field, you will acquire knowledge and information about that field that is going to be unique and different from really anyone else in the world. There is something that you know. It doesn't really matter what business your company is in. There is something that you know or have gotten to know that is different and special from others. And so if you can turn that special something into content that is of interest to your market, you can really kind of corner the conversation on that topic. And then your company can become associated with being very knowledgeable and being very authentic and genuine in providing educational information about that topic. And that's exceptionally important for brand recognition. It also just helps to build trust with your customer base, because what they really want, first and foremost, every B2B business, we all want customers that want to partner with us, right? We don't want them just to come and buy from us one time. We want them to come back to us. We want them to work with us, and we want to educate them. We want them to educate us. We want that to be a partnership. And in order to develop that kind of a relationship with your customers, you really have to build trust. And one of the best ways to build trust is to provide something of value that people, recognize has value, and to do it in an authentic way. And I think thought leadership is really at the center of all of that. And I'll give you a quick example. One of the things that we're doing at Diligent right now is talking about what we're calling modern governance, which is really, board governance has been the same, really going all the way back to the 1680s, when the Bank of England first sort of defined what corporate governance would look like. And so, here we are, it's 2019, and we're still kind of using a system that came into place in the 1680s, or maybe it was the 1640s in the Bank of England. And so we've been saying, we don't really live in that world anymore. There are these things called Twitter, LinkedIn, all these different ways that we get information now. I mean, in particular, if I think about Twitter, right? If you're a corporate leader these days, you could walk in one morning and there could be a hashtag #MeToo tweet that will completely upend every plan you had for the next 4 months, right? So we have to really modernize governance to fit the reality that we live in. So we've been talking a lot about this idea of modern governance. And modern governance is not like the name of a product that we sell or the name of a piece of software that we have. It's really an idea around the work that we do. And so as we're starting to talk about this idea of modern governance, really the only way to do it is to talk about, well, what are board practices? What do they look like? What have they looked like? How are they evolving? Let's talk to directors. What do they think is happening? All of that becomes thought leadership. And so it's not, it doesn't have a one-to-one direct correlation to some type of a sales play. Mm-hmm. It's all about how do we teach the market what we are learning? We have this incredible access to this huge group of leaders. Well, that should hopefully lend some knowledge to us. So how do we take that knowledge and make it useful to our market and share it back out with people?
Yeah, that last piece is sort of at the center, certainly at the center of why Sweetfish Media exists. I mean, honestly, That's the question, right? How
exactly.
We have access to leaders. How do we take this and make it something valuable? And a question popped into my head when I talk to marketers every day on this show. And when I talk to marketers, we do talk about thought leadership, and I'm interested in what you think is the difference between the way a dedicated VP of thought leadership approaches branding and thought leadership versus the way it would look under, or the way you've seen it look under the marketing umbrella. What are some of the differences there?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I mean, so as a company, so I actually am part of the marketing team, but in a sort of a separate silo from what we would call sort of our demand generation unit, which is all about kind of creating content, about building demand, providing things that really interest people and kind of drive them to our websites and things like that. And thought leadership works very closely with that team. I mean, we work, very closely together, but we're a little bit different because I think what we're trying to do as a thought leadership team is try to figure out what is on the minds of the people that we're working with, and then try to provide them information of value on those issues related to things that we know that they may not know. And that's different, I would say, from doing something that is much more focused around sales and marketing, which would be, let's tell them something we want to tell them about us, right? So we're trying to say, hey, we have this incredible access to information that you might not have. We know you're interested in this issue, and here's what we can tell you about that issue. And that issue, whatever it is, may have nothing at all to do with our software, may have nothing at all to do with anything that we sell, but we know it's something on your mind, and we have this incredible access. And so we're going to provide that for you as a service, just as a way of saying, we get you, we hear you, we know this is important, and we're going to provide this to you. So it's just a little bit of a different mindset.
Yeah, this is so important. And what you're talking about is what I see this difference playing out. I think you and I were talking offline about what happens on LinkedIn, where, there are those folks whose posts whose posts and whose content that is and whose outreach on LinkedIn is very obviously geared at getting folks to work with them and having more of a one-to-one sales correlation, like you mentioned. And then there are those folks who is like, I'm interested in what folks in this industry are up against and how I can help with that. So it is understanding that difference. And one of the ways that you and I talked about as far as advancing a thought leadership initiative, as it differs from marketing initiatives, is leveraging internal and external evangelists. Talk a little bit about that for me real quick.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And when I was, just sort of wrapping up my final couple of years with Board Effect before we got acquired, I had sort of taken on the role of being our technology evangelist. And then I started in that role at Diligent and now am really overseeing everything we're doing around thought leadership. And, it's a role that's very near and dear to my heart because it's a little bit of marketing, a little bit of sales, a little bit of partnerships, and a lot of just helping people to connect with your company and your mission and your product in a meaningful and authentic way, right? So and I think when you are creating evangelists, whether they are internal to your company, they're people that work at your company, or they're customer evangelists, people on the outside who just become super excited about what you do and they can't wait to tell their friends and family all about it. What you really want to try to do is make sure two things. One is that it is absolutely authentic. It cannot be fake. You really have to genuinely believe and have data to back up that what you are saying is accurate. So that's really, really important. Step number one. Step number two is it has to be something of value to the person you're speaking with. And I think that's a place where I see sometimes thought leadership going a little bit awry, or things that are called thought leadership that I would say they're probably not really thought leadership. They're more like clickbait,
right?
Where it's, hey, I'm going to say a bunch of words that I think you'll be interested in. And when you click on them, there's not really a there. It just ends up being kind of fluff. And there's not really any real meat to it. That's very different in my mind from what real thought leadership is. What real thought leadership is I have something that I know because of my access to information or because of what I do for a living that I'm going to share with you that is meaningful to you because I know this is a topic that's on your mind. And I'm not trying to sell you something with it. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to give you something you don't already know. And it's new. It's some new information. It's not already been done somewhere else 1,000 times, or it's a new spin on an old topic because I have a different perspective based on what I do for a living, right? So all of that can be broadcast through what I would say the evangelist channel. And that can be, in presentations at conferences. It could be on podcasts. It could be on, any type of a webinar. And you can sort of take that message of here's how you can connect to something that we know about. Here's what we can offer back of value to you. And I'm going to tell you all this stuff, not because I'm trying to sell you something right now, but because I want you to understand you can trust me. And because you can trust me, you might be interested to know more about what I do. It's really about building that trust and building that corpus of information that's helpful to people based on what they're already interested in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. And the question that comes to mind, though, because I know that a lot of the conversations I'm having with marketers, even especially those who are talking about their own thought leadership initiatives, have not taken the step that you've taken. That's just flat out from the beginning saying, no, I am not trying to make a one-to-one sales correlation. So in the absence of that, though, and in the absence of it being a demand gen thing, how are we measuring? What are we measuring? How are we setting goals? How do we know it's working?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I mean, and just to be clear, I'm not saying that it's completely divorced of sales, right? So,
sure,
I mean, obviously we're all in business for a reason. Like we're not just doing this for our health, right? So, I mean, clearly at the end of the day, it should lead in some way back to some positive traction in the numbers game. But really, I think one of the ways you can measure it, a couple of things. One is you can sort of measure share of voice. So you can kind of look out in the market and see, all the conversations happening on social media and in print media and, et cetera, and sort of see, all the different conversations happening around a particular topic, what percentage of those are attributable back to you and to your efforts, and that can be a metric that you can use. Another way that you can sort of think about thought leadership as being important is just brand reputation, right? So how does it positively impact your brand? Does it help people want to be part of your brand because what you're doing is so interesting and so relevant to them and resonates so strongly with them that they're more likely to be brand loyal and they're more likely to tell lots of people about you, right? You can look at your net promoter score. Like you should definitely be seeing it, sort of a needle moving on the net promoter score. If people feel very strongly about your brand because everything you've been telling them and sharing with them is so positive and good and they can trust you, it's going to make you more resilient if your product one day isn't 100% perfect, right? They're not going to be willing to just throw you out the door because of one glitch. They're going to say, well, okay, it was one little glitch. That's not awesome, but this is a good company and I can trust them and I believe in them and they give me lots of things of value, not just this one product, right? So it's really kind of, you're looking at those metrics as much as you would look at any, you can also obviously take thought leadership and then use it for demand generation.
For sure.
So you can really clearly make that pathway.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, that's not necessarily the point.
Right. Yeah. And so the reason why I asked that question is because one of my goals as a takeaway from this conversation for our listeners, and I think you've done a great job of giving them this, was those folks who want to get started, I want them to feel, or who want to lobby for this in their own organizations, I want them to feel armed with that kind of information, because these are the kinds of questions that if they're going to get pushback, these are the kind of questions folks are going to ask.
Right.
And so that was my last question for you on the subject is, what advice would you give for folks who are trying to fight this good fight and start this initiative at their own organization?
Yeah, I would say there's another, so I'm glad you asked that question, because there's another sort of important component to this that is helpful to just mention, and that is the utility of having a thought leadership enterprise for the internal team as well. And I'll give an example, right? So our sales team spends a lot of time speaking with prospective customers about our software and hopefully engaging with them to try to get them to implement the software with their board of directors. Now, not a lot of our sales team members have a 20-year experience in board governance, right? So, they'll be on the phone with a company secretary or general counsel, and they are experts in our software, but they might not know all the ins and outs of exactly what those folks do on a daily basis. And they might not really fully understand a question that they get asked, right? They might get asked a question about some very specific issue that person is dealing with, and they want to know how to do this in the software. And they might get stuck. And so one of the other benefits of having thought leadership is then it gives the internal sales team a place to turn where they can A, educate themselves more about your market, but B, give them other things to talk about, right? Because if all salespeople are doing is just talking about, here's this nice button that you press and here's what it does when you press it, that's not going to really create that positive brand feeling for the customer. It's not going to build customer loyalty. It's not going to build customer evangelists. It's not going to really give you that same stickiness that you want. Versus if the person's having a conversation of, hey, we just did this research report out of our institute, and it found, X% of people like you have this experience. And here's what we think is really important about that. And by the way, that's one of the reasons that our software does the following. Yeah. Yeah. That's a dramatically different conversation. And it's going to make the customer feel so much better that they're working with a company that thinks in this way and that is investing in providing that kind of intelligence that they can actually benefit from, but it's also they're benefiting from the fact that they're now working with a salesperson that knows this and can say it with confidence. So I think there's a sort of a whole other component of thought leadership, which is how it benefits the company, how it benefits the internal team.
I mean, absolutely. There's a company I worked for. It used to be called Kinzer. It's a healthcare software, EMR software. It's now called WellSky. They've blown up, super successful folks. And one of the things they built this company on before thought leadership became such a buzzy term was doing just that, was offering, like you're talking about, valuable resources that came from this really deep understanding about what the day-to-day was of folks working in that industry at every level. And you're so right about the way that it armed we as salespeople. For instance, if they were having a webinar, right, that was part of this thought leadership initiative, sales folks, even the SDRs, which I was at this institution, this organization, were to sit in on these webinars. Yeah. So that, like you're saying, there's a difference between, I know my marketing team just released a new white paper. There's a difference between me having a conversation, someone asking me a question, and me saying, I don't know, I'll email you this white paper. And me being able to intelligently speak to the problems that these people face, or intelligently speak to where the industry is going next. So that, I think, is so key, is the thought leadership of VP of thought leadership, of the thought leadership department itself, modeling for salespeople and for the sales team how to talk about what it's really like at the ground level in those organizations. So this is so good.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's almost just kind of giving back, right? It's like, hey, we are learning so much by working with this massive market. We got to give something back. Like there's got to be something that we can do to share what we're learning. And I think that sharing happens both internally and externally. I mean, it helps everyone. It helps the customer, it helps the company, it helps the salespeople. If we all just get a little smarter, if we all just know a little bit more about the market that we're working in. So I feel like it's the kind of discipline that, it may not always be obvious to people why you would invest in it. But once you have it and you see the power that is truly inherent in having a strong thought leadership discipline, it's hard to live without it, because you realize how much more attractive your company has become by being the one that knows stuff and can share it articulately.
Absolutely. I love it. This was perfect. Like I said, I think everything that I wanted folks to get out of this conversation and take into their respective organizations, you've done a masterful job at giving us that. And it's been fun too. Because sometimes you get one or the other. I got to be honest with you, Dottie. All right. So now one of my favorite parts of the B2B Growth shows is when after I've finished picking your brain and see what I can get out of it, I am going to find out what you put in it, Dottie. What have you been reading? What learning resource have you been engaging with these days that's got you excited or is informing your approach?
Well, so Nikki, I hate to be a little bit self-serving, but I have to tell you, this is really the God's honest truth. I've been reading my own book. And I really do mean this because I've been on a global book tour for the last 5 weeks. So,
this makes sense.
So I really have been reading it because I've had to talk about it a lot. But so the book that we wrote is the Governance in the Digital Age, a guide for the modern corporate board director. And really, this is a book that I'd been thinking about writing for about 15 years. What we tried to do was, again, we work with all of these organizations all around the world. We work with their corporate leaders. We wanted to understand what is changing about corporate governance in this time when information moves at the speed of a tweet. Mm-hmm. And we really wanted to know how are boards dealing with this, and are there any lessons learned that we can use? So we did a lot of research. We did a lot of interviews with people. We wanted to understand what's working. I feel like there's a lot of stuff written about what goes badly wrong. Sure. There's not nearly enough stuff written about what goes right. So we tried to even that score a little bit by writing this book and trying to provide some examples of things that can go right. So not to be too self-serving, but this is actually what I've been spending a lot of time talking about and thinking about for the last several months.
I'm with it. Get it, girl. Governance in the digital age. Okay. And so I know that like me, folks listening to this are going to be inspired and want to follow along with the content that you are putting out as a thought leader and VP of Thought Leadership for Diligent. How can folks best connect with you, Dottie?
Yeah, so I'm pretty easily available. So a couple things. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you just look for GovTechGeek, you'll find me on LinkedIn. That's also my Twitter handle, so GovTechGeek. And then I'd also encourage you to check out the Corporate Director Podcast. So you can find us at DirectorPod. You can send an email to podcast@diligent.com or to thoughtleaders@diligent.com. Any one of those ways, you will find me. And I'd be happy to connect with you.
Sweet. I'm going to do it right away. One last question behind you, because you guys can't see this, right? Because it's a podcast, but we each have bookshelves behind us. And I just noticed, is that a Philadelphia Eagles fandom thing behind you?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So let me just get close to this camera. I am wearing my Dallas Cowboys.
Oh,
I don't know.
Nikki, we were so close to being good friends.
Something beautiful was happening here, Dottie. And then
I know. Well, okay. In all fairness, I have to come clean. So my husband worked for the team for about 7 years. And during that time, I actually was the voice of an animated character for their weekly kids show. So I have a bunch of stuff on my shelf from when I did that gig for about 6 years.
I see. It says Kids Club.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not football season, so we're still friends. But thank you so much, Dottie. This was a blast. And I can't wait to see, what other folks do with what you've given us here and what you guys are able to do with you at the helm of thought leadership there at Diligent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nikki. It was a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.